At 11:47 p.m. on October 19, 2022, a residential elevator in Jersey City, New Jersey stopped on a floor that shouldn't exist. The building has 12 floors. The panel inside the elevator has buttons numbered 1 through 12. But when the doors opened that night, the digital display read 13. The woman inside the elevator, 29-year-old Maya Brennan, stood there for 42 seconds before the doors closed again. She never pressed a button. She never stepped out. Security footage from inside the elevator shows her staring straight ahead the entire time, her grocery bag still in both hands, her mouth slightly open. When the doors finally closed and the elevator continued to the 7th floor where she lived, Maya walked out, went into her apartment, locked the door, and didn't leave for 6 days. The building manager filed a wellness check request on day 4. By day 6, Maya's sister drove in from Philadelphia and used the spare key. Maya was sitting at her kitchen table with every light in the apartment on, a notebook open in front of her, the same sentence written over and over across 11 pages. It wasn't empty. I'm telling you this because I lived in that building. Apartment 9C, I moved in 3 months before Maya did, back in July 2022, and I was one of the last people to see her before she left Jersey City for good. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me take you back to the beginning, back to when the building still felt normal, back to when an elevator was just an elevator and the number 13 was just a number people avoided out of superstition, not genuine fear. The building is called Harmon Towers, though nobody really calls it that. Most people just say the Harmon Building or that place on Bright Street. It's one of those mid-rise apartment complexes that went up in the late 90s during a development push in Jersey City, all brick and glass and balconies that nobody uses because of the wind coming off the Hudson. 12 floors, 48 units, a small lobby with mailboxes, and a single front desk that's only staffed during business hours. The neighborhood is quiet, mostly young professionals and a few older residents who have been there since the building opened. You can see the Manhattan skyline from the upper floors on clear days. Rents are reasonable for the area. The walls are thin enough that you hear your neighbors sometimes, but not bad enough to complain. There's a bodega 2 blocks down, a laundromat across the street, and a path station within walking distance. Normal. Functional. The kind of place you move into because it checks the boxes, not because you love it. I took the apartment in July because I just started a new job in Manhattan and didn't want the commute from where I'd been living in Newark. The rent was $800 less than comparable places closer to the path, and the unit itself was fine. 1 bedroom, decent-sized living room, kitchen with appliances that worked, bathroom that had been updated sometime in the past decade. The lease was standard. The building manager, a guy in his mid-50s named Ron Kelleher, seemed competent enough during the walkthrough. He wore reading glasses on a chain and carried a clipboard and pointed out the trash chute on each floor and explained the guest parking situation and told me the elevators were mostly reliable. That last part should have been a warning, but at the time I just laughed and said something about taking the stairs being good exercise. Ron smiled the way building managers do when they know you'll understand later. The elevator system was simple. 2 elevators side by side in the lobby, both serving all 12 floors. The cars themselves were standard. Beige walls, fluorescent lighting, that weird padded handrail that always feels slightly sticky, a mirror on the back wall that had a crack running through it in the left elevator. The panel had buttons numbered 1 through 12, a door open button, a door close button, an alarm button, and a phone button for emergencies. No basement level, no penthouse designation. Just 12 floors of residential units. The buttons lit up orange when you pressed them, and the digital display above the door showed your current floor in red blocky numbers. Nothing unusual. Nothing that would make you think twice. I didn't meet Maya until late August. We ended up in the elevator together one evening, both coming home from work around the same time. She had moved into 7F, almost directly below me. She was carrying a box from IKEA and I held the door for her, and we did that polite small talk thing people do in elevators. Mentioned the weather, complained mildly about the commute, confirmed we both worked in the city. She seemed nice. friendly but not overly so. Brown hair pulled back in a ponytail, wire-rimmed glasses, the kind of tired smile that comes from working a job you don't hate but don't love either. She worked in financial compliance for a firm in Lower Manhattan. She'd moved from Boston a month earlier. She was still unpacking. The conversation lasted maybe 90 seconds from the lobby to the 7th floor where she got off. Normal. Forgettable. The kind of interaction you have 100 times living in a city building. The first time I noticed something strange about the elevators was early September, maybe the second week of the month. I was heading down to the lobby around 7 a.m. to grab coffee before work. I called the elevator and waited. The right elevator arrived first. I got in and pressed the button for the lobby. The doors closed. The elevator descended. Normal. But as we passed the 4th floor, I felt the car slow slightly, like it was going to stop, and the number 4 lit up on the display even though I hadn't pressed it and nobody was on the elevator except me. The car paused for maybe 2 seconds, hovering between floors, and then continued down to the lobby without stopping. The doors opened. I stepped out. I didn't think much about it at the time. Elevators malfunction. Sensors misfire. Someone probably pressed the button on 4 and then took the stairs. It happens. But then it happened again 3 days later. Same thing. Descending from the 9th floor in the morning, the elevator slowed between 4 and 3. The number 4 briefly illuminated on the display, a moment of hesitation, then continued down. This time I mentioned it to Ron when I saw him in the lobby later that day. He was checking the mailboxes, sorting through some packages. I said something casual like, "Hey, the elevator's been stopping weird lately, just so you know." Ron looked up from his clipboard and nodded like he'd heard it before. He said the technician had been out twice in the past month and couldn't find anything wrong. He said it was probably just the weight sensors being oversensitive. He said if it kept happening to let him know and he'd call the company again. Then he went back to sorting packages. That was the end of the conversation. If you're still listening, you already know that's not the kind of detail you forget later. At the time it felt like nothing, just a weird quirk of an aging building system, the kind of minor annoyance you live with because everything else is fine. But those small moments, those little cracks in the normal routine, they're the things that come back to you when everything else starts falling apart. September passed. The elevator kept doing its hesitation act between floors, mostly on the way down, mostly around the 4th floor. Other residents noticed too. I heard someone mention it to Ron in the lobby one morning. A woman from the 6th floor said the left elevator had stopped completely the previous week and she'd had to use the emergency phone to get someone to reset it. Ron wrote something on his clipboard and said he'd follow up. Life continued. People adapted. You take the stairs when you're only going a few floors. You give yourself extra time in the morning in case the elevator acts up. You stop thinking about it because thinking about every small inconvenience in city living would drive you insane. I ran into Maya again in mid-September, late at night this time. I'd been out with coworkers, got home around 11 p.m. and she was in the lobby checking her mailbox. She looked tired. She was wearing sweatpants and an oversized sweater, hair down, no glasses this time. We exchanged hellos and walked to the elevator together. The right one came first. We got in. She pressed 7, I pressed 9. The doors closed and we started ascending. And then between the 3rd and 4th floors, the elevator stopped. Not slowed, stopped. The digital display showed the number 4, but we weren't moving. Maya and I glanced at each other. She pressed the door open button. Nothing. I pressed her floor button again. Nothing. The car just sat there humming. The fluorescent light flickering slightly overhead. After about 10 seconds, Maya reached for the emergency phone button, but before she could press it, the elevator lurched and continued upward. The display jumped from 4 to 5. It stopped at 7. The doors opened. Maya stepped out and turned back with an apologetic smile and said, "This building, right?" I nodded and the doors closed and I rode up to 9 without further incident. But here's the thing I remember from that moment, the thing that didn't register as important until much later. When the elevator stopped on 4, I heard something. It was faint, barely noticeable under the mechanical hum of the elevator itself, but it was there. A sound like someone dragging something heavy across a floor, a scraping sound, slow, rhythmic. 3 scrapes, then silence, then the elevator started moving again. At the time I convinced myself it was the elevator mechanism itself, some gear or cable making noise during the malfunction. Your brain does that. It finds rational explanations because the alternative is admitting you heard something that doesn't make sense, and admitting that means questioning other things, and questioning other things means accepting that maybe the world doesn't operate the way you've always assumed it does. So I filed it away. Just a weird elevator sound. Nothing to worry about. October came. The weather turned. That early fall chill started seeping into everything, the kind that makes you keep your windows closed at night and pull out the extra blanket you'd stored away in summer. The Horeng building has steam heat that comes on in early October whether you want it or not, and the radiators clank and hiss at random hours, adding to the general soundtrack of city building life. Neighbors you rarely see during summer suddenly appear in hallways, everyone moving a little faster, a little less inclined to chat, everyone pulling into themselves the way people do when winter approaches. I didn't see Maya much during the first 2 weeks of October. Our schedules must have shifted because we stopped running into each other in the elevator. I was working longer hours, coming home after 8 p.m. most nights, ordering takeout, falling asleep watching streaming shows I wasn't really paying attention to. The elevator continued its weird behavior, the hesitation on 4, the occasional full stop that lasted a few seconds before resuming. Other residents complained to Ron. He put up a notice in the lobby on October 10th saying the elevator company was scheduled to do a full inspection on the 18th. The notice stayed taped to the wall by the mailboxes for 8 days. On October 17th, someone had written in pen at the bottom, "Good luck with that." The inspection happened on October 18th. I know because I was homesick that day, some head cold that had been going around my office, and I heard the technicians working. They arrived around 9 a.m., 2 guys with toolboxes and clipboards, and they spent most of the day taking apart the panel in the lobby and running the elevators up and down and talking into radios. I heard them in the hallway at one point, voices echoing through the elevator shaft, discussing voltage and sensors and something about the control board. By 4 p.m. they were gone. Ron put up another notice that evening, "Elevator maintenance complete. Both cars fully operational. Thank you for your patience." The paper was slightly crooked on the wall. Someone had already drawn a smiley face next to the message. That night, October 18th, 2022, was when it happened to Maya. The incident that started everything. I didn't know about it until the next morning, but I'm going to tell you what happened based on what I learned later from Maya's own account, from the security footage, from the building records, from the things she wrote in that notebook before she stopped writing anything at all. Maya came home from work that night around 11:30 p.m. She'd stopped at the grocery store on her way back from the PATH station, just picking up basics: milk, bread, some vegetables, a box of pasta. Nothing unusual. The bodega 2 blocks from the building stays open until midnight, and the walk from the station takes about 12 minutes if you're not rushing. The temperature that night was in the low 50s, clear sky, a little windy. Maya was wearing a jacket and jeans and carrying 2 paper grocery bags. She entered the Horeng building through the front door at 11:41 p.m. The security camera in the lobby captured her walking to the elevator, pressing the call button, waiting. The right elevator arrived. She stepped inside. The timestamp on the elevator camera reads 11:43:07 p.m. The elevator interior camera shows Maya standing in the center of the car, grocery bags in both hands, facing forward toward the doors. She presses the button for the 7th floor. The orange light illuminates, the doors close, the display shows 1 for lobby, then 2, then 3, then 4, everything normal. The elevator continues rising, 5, 6, and then at 11:43:34 p.m. the display changes. The number 7 doesn't appear. Instead, the display shows 13. The elevator stops. There's no jolt, no mechanical grinding. It just stopped smoothly like it had arrived at an intended destination. Maya's standing there, still holding her grocery bag, staring at the display. 7 seconds pass. You can see her blink. She shifts her weight slightly. Then the doors open. The security footage from inside the elevator doesn't show what's outside. The camera is mounted in the corner, angled down and forward to capture the interior of the car and whoever's inside it. But it does show Maya's face. And what happens to her expression in those 42 seconds is the reason this story matters. Because in the first few seconds, she looks confused. Her eyebrows draw together. Her head tilts slightly, like she's trying to make sense of what she's seeing. Then confusion shifts to something else. Her eyes widen. Her mouth opens slightly. The grocery bags lower an inch or two in her hands like her arms have gone slack, and she just stares. For 42 seconds, Maya Brennan stands in that elevator and stares at something outside the doors on a floor that doesn't exist, and whatever she's seeing, it's enough to make her forget to breathe. You can see it in the footage. Her chest doesn't move. She's frozen. Complete stillness. Then at 11:44, 16 p.m., the doors begin to close. Maya doesn't move. She doesn't reach out to stop them. She doesn't step forward or press any buttons. She just stands there as the doors slide shut, blocking her view of whatever was outside. The elevator hums. The display changes from 13 to 7. The car rises the remaining distance. The doors open on the 7th floor. Maya steps out. The timestamp reads 11:44. 31 p.m. She walks down the hallway toward her apartment, moving like someone in a dream, and the footage ends when she exits the camera's range. Keep this in mind, because what happened next is why I'm even telling this out loud. Maya went into her apartment and locked the door. She put the groceries on the kitchen counter. She didn't put them away. The milk stayed out all night. By morning it was spoiled. She sat down at the kitchen table and tried to make sense of what she'd seen. She told me later, during one of our last conversations before she left, that the hardest part wasn't seeing it. The hardest part was trusting that she'd actually seen it, that it wasn't some kind of exhaustion-induced hallucination or trick of lighting or her brain misfiring after a long day. Because if it was real, if what she saw was actually there, then everything else about the building, about the elevators, about the 4th floor and the hesitations and the strange sounds, all of it meant something bigger and worse than just mechanical problems. What did she see when those doors opened on the 13th floor? She told me it looked like a hallway, the same beige walls as every other floor in the building, the same fluorescent lighting overhead, the same gray carpet with the dark blue pattern that runs through all the corridors, the same numbered apartment doors, but there were differences, small ones, wrong ones. The lighting was dimmer, like some of the bulbs were out. The carpet looked wet in places, dark stains spreading from under one of the doors, and the apartment numbers were wrong, not missing, not damaged. Just wrong. She said the first door she could see clearly was marked 13A, but the number was painted on instead of being the brass plate that every other apartment in the building has. And the door itself was open, not wide open, just slightly ajar, maybe 6 inches, enough to see darkness inside, enough to know that someone or something had left it that way. But the worst part, the thing that made Maya stand frozen in that elevator for 42 seconds, was the sound. She heard breathing. Heavy, wet breathing, like someone with fluid in their lungs, someone struggling to pull air in and push it out. It was coming from somewhere down the hallway, maybe from the open door, maybe from further away. She couldn't tell. The acoustics were wrong, like the hallway was longer than it should be, like the sound was bouncing off walls that weren't there. And underneath the breathing, faint but distinct, was that same scraping sound I'd heard weeks earlier. Slow, rhythmic, dragging, getting closer. Maya didn't wait to see what was making the sound. She didn't step out of the elevator. She didn't call out to ask if someone needed help. Every instinct in her body screamed at her to stay exactly where she was, to not move, to not make a sound, to pray that the doors would close before whatever was in that hallway reached the elevator. And they did. 42 seconds after opening, the doors slid shut, and Maya rode up to her actual floor. and she went into her apartment and locked the door and spent the rest of the night sitting at her kitchen table with every light on, trying to convince herself that she hadn't seen what she'd seen. But she had, and deep down she knew it. The next morning, October 19th, Maya didn't go to work. She called in sick. She stayed in her apartment and tried to function normally. She ate breakfast. She answered emails. She did laundry. But every time she thought about leaving the apartment, every time she considered going out into the hallway and calling the elevator, her hands started shaking. By afternoon, she'd convinced herself that she needed to verify what happened, that she needed to go down to the lobby and talk to Ron and ask to see the security footage, because seeing it on camera would either confirm she was losing her mind or confirm that something impossible had happened, and either way at least she'd know. She made it as far as her apartment door. She stood there with her hand on the doorknob for 5 minutes, trying to force herself to turn it, and she couldn't. The idea of getting in that elevator again, of pressing a button and watching the display and waiting to see what number appeared, it paralyzed her. She went back to the kitchen table and sat down and opened a notebook and started writing. Not a journal, not organized thoughts. Just the same sentence, over and over, filling page after page. It wasn't empty. Because that was the detail that wouldn't leave her alone. When those doors opened on the 13th floor and she saw that hallway with its dim lights and wet carpet and wrong apartment numbers, when she heard that breathing and that scraping sound, she'd also felt something else. A presence. The certainty that she wasn't alone, that something was aware of her, that something in that hallway had noticed the elevator doors opening and had turned its attention toward her. She didn't see it. She didn't know what it was. But she felt it looking at her, and that feeling didn't go away even after the doors closed. It followed her to the 7th floor. It followed her into her apartment. It was still there, watching, waiting, and Maya couldn't shake the conviction that if she got in that elevator again, if the doors opened on 13 again, whatever was there would be closer this time. Closer to the elevator. Closer to her. I found out about Maya's situation on October 23rd, 4 days after the incident. I hadn't seen her around the building, which wasn't unusual, but that afternoon I ran into her sister, Vanessa, in the lobby. Vanessa had driven in from Philadelphia that morning after Maya stopped answering her calls. She was waiting for Ron to bring the spare key to 7F because Maya wouldn't answer the door. Vanessa looked stressed, said her sister had been acting strange all week, wouldn't leave the apartment, wouldn't explain what was wrong. I mentioned I lived upstairs and offered to wait with her. Ron arrived 20 minutes later with the key, and the three of us rode up to 7 in the left elevator. Normal ride. No hesitations. No strange display numbers. We got out on 7 and walked to Maya's door, and Ron knocked loudly and announced himself, and when there was no response, he used the key. The apartment was a disaster, not in a violent way, in a neglect way. The groceries from 5 nights earlier were still on the counter, the milk spoiled and swelling in its container, fruit attracting flies. Every light was on, every single one. The overhead lights, the lamps, even the stove hood light in the kitchen. The windows were closed, curtains drawn. The temperature inside had to be 80 degrees from the radiator blasting heat. And Maya was sitting at the kitchen table in the same clothes she'd been wearing when she came home that night, the same sweater and jeans, her hair unwashed and tangled, her eyes red from lack of sleep. The notebook was open in front of her, pages covered with that same sentence in increasingly erratic handwriting. Vanessa immediately went to her sister and tried to get her to respond, asking what was wrong, what happened, why wasn't she answering her phone. Maya looked up like she was surprised anyone else was there. She blinked slowly. Then she said in a voice that sounded hollow and distant, "I can't leave. I can't get in the elevator." Vanessa exchanged looks with Ron and me. She asked why not. Maya's eyes drifted to the notebook. She touched the page with one finger, tracing the words she'd written. "Because it might stop on 13 again, and if it does, the door might be open wider, or the breathing might be closer, or it might already be inside the elevator waiting." Ron cleared his throat and said something about how the elevators had been fully inspected and everything was working fine. Maya turned to look at him, and the expression on her face was so empty and exhausted that Ron stopped talking mid-sentence. She said, "The building only has 12 floors. The elevator took me to 13. I saw it. I heard it. There's something in this building that shouldn't exist, and nobody's going to believe me because it doesn't make sense, but I know what I saw." Some stories don't get told unless someone is actually here to hear them. And in that moment, standing in Maya's overheated apartment with the spoiled milk on the counter, and the obsessive writing spread across the table and the look in her eyes that said she'd seen something that broke her understanding of reality, I believed her. Not because it made logical sense, but because I'd heard that scraping sound too. I'd felt the elevator hesitate on 4. I'd noticed the small wrongnesses that everyone else dismissed as mechanical quirks. And if Maya was telling the truth, if there really was a 13th floor, then all those small wrongnesses suddenly connected into something larger and more terrifying than I wanted to admit. Vanessa convinced Maya to pack a bag and leave with her. They took the stairs down all 7 floors to the lobby because Maya refused to get in the elevator. Vanessa half-carried her sister to the car, and they drove back to Philadelphia that same day. Ron filed an incident report with the building management company, noting a possible mental health crisis, but not mentioning anything about a 13th floor because that would sound insane. He asked me not to spread rumors about what happened because it might cause panic or liability issues. I agreed, but I also went down to the lobby that evening and asked Ron if I could see the elevator security footage from October 18th. He was reluctant at first, said it was a privacy issue, but I pressed and eventually he pulled it up on the security computer in the small office behind the front desk. We watched the footage together. Maya entering the elevator at 11:43 p.m. pressing 7, the doors closing, and then Ron fast-forwarded through the ride, skipping ahead to when the doors opened on 7 and Maya stepped out. I stopped him. I asked him to go back and play it at normal speed. He sighed but complied. We watched the full ride, the display counting up 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, then a brief moment where the display flickered, then 7, the doors opening, Maya stepping out. I pointed at the screen. "Did you see that? The display flickered." Ron leaned closer. We watched it again. And yes, there was definitely a flicker, a split second where the number on the display jumped to something else before showing 7. But it happened so fast that you couldn't tell what number it had been. Just a glitch, a momentary distortion in the video. Ron said it was probably a camera issue, compression artifact, nothing unusual. I asked if we could see a different angle, maybe the hallway camera on 7. He pulled it up. The footage showed the elevator doors opening on 7 at 11:44:31 p.m., exactly matching the timestamp from inside the car. Maya stepped out and walked toward her apartment. Nothing unusual. No missing time. No evidence that the elevator had stopped anywhere except the 7th floor. But I'd seen Maya's face in that elevator footage. I'd seen her expression when the doors opened, the way she stared at something outside the frame, the way her body went rigid. And that reaction wasn't to a normal hallway on the 7th floor. That was a reaction to something wrong, something impossible, something that terrified her enough to freeze for 42 seconds before the doors mercifully closed. The security footage might not show a 13th floor on the display, might not capture what Maya saw outside those doors, but it captured her response. And that was evidence enough for me. Ron closed the video files and said he'd recommend the management company send someone to check the elevator cameras, make sure they were recording properly. He said if I heard anything else unusual to let him know. Then he went back to his duties and I went back upstairs to my apartment. It was almost 8 p.m. by then, getting dark outside, and as I stood in the lobby waiting for the elevator, I felt, for the first time since moving into the building, genuine dread. The kind that sits in your chest and makes your heart beat faster for no rational reason. The kind that tells you to take the stairs, to avoid the risk, to not tempt whatever's hiding in the building's mechanical systems. But I got in the elevator anyway, the right one, pressed 9, watched the display count up, 1, 2, 3, 4, a slight hesitation, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. The doors opened. I stepped out. Nothing unusual, just a normal ride in a normal building. I went into my apartment and locked the door and tried to convince myself that Maya had experienced some kind of stress-induced episode, that the security footage showed exactly what happened and nothing more, that there was no 13th floor because buildings don't spontaneously generate extra floors that only appear sometimes on elevator displays. But I also left all my lights on that night, and I didn't sleep well. Because somewhere in the back of my mind, I kept hearing that scraping sound, kept imagining those elevator doors opening onto a hallway that shouldn't exist, kept wondering what would happen if it happened to me. If I was alone in the elevator when the display showed 13, if I would have the strength to stay inside and wait for the doors to close, or if curiosity would pull me forward, make me step out, make me walk down that wrong hallway toward whatever was breathing in the darkness. The next few days passed quietly, too quietly. Maya didn't come back to the building. Vanessa called Ron on October 25th to say her sister was staying with her in Philadelphia indefinitely and would figure out the apartment situation later. Ron said he'd work with them on breaking the lease. Life in the Harmon building continued. Residents came and went. The elevators functioned. Nobody else reported anything unusual. And slowly, inevitably, I started to doubt what I'd seen and heard. Maybe the scraping sound had been mechanical. Maybe the hesitations were just worn-out sensors. Maybe Maya really had experienced some kind of mental health crisis, and I'd gotten caught up in it, convinced myself there was something more because the alternative, that I lived in a completely normal building where nothing supernatural could possibly happen, felt somehow disappointing. We want mysteries. We want explanations for the weird feelings we get sometimes, the sense that something's not quite right, the prickle of unease in empty hallways. We want validation that our fears aren't irrational. But buildings don't have extra floors. That's not how architecture works. That's not how reality works. I kept telling myself that, right up until October 31st. Halloween night. I don't usually do much for Halloween, but some coworkers had convinced me to go out to a bar in Manhattan after work, one of those places doing a themed event with costume contest and drink specials. I agreed mostly to be social, went along with the group, had a decent time. Got back to Jersey City around 11 p.m., walked from the PATH station to the Harmon building through streets full of leftover Halloween decorations and a few drunk people in costumes stumbling home. The temperature had dropped into the 40s. The wind coming off the Hudson cut through my jacket. I was tired and cold and just wanted to get home. I entered the lobby at 11:08 p.m. empty except for me. The front desk was unoccupied, Ron's shift having ended at 6 p.m. on weekdays. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead. My footsteps echoed on the tile floor. I walked to the elevator and pressed the call button. The right elevator arrived first like it usually did. The doors opened. I stepped inside. Empty car. I pressed 9. The doors closed. The elevator began to ascend. 1, 2, 3, 4. The elevator hesitated. That familiar pause lasting maybe 2 seconds. Then it continued. 5, 6, 7, 8. And then the display flickered. Just like in Maya's footage, a quick distortion, a split second where the number changed to something else. But I saw it this time. Because I was looking right at the display, watching carefully, waiting for something wrong. And in that flicker, for just a fraction of a second, the display showed 13. My stomach dropped. The elevator continued rising. 9. The doors opened onto my floor, normal hallway, normal lighting, my apartment door visible down the corridor. I stepped out quickly and turned back to look at the elevator. The display inside still showed 9. Nothing unusual. The doors closed and the elevator descended back to the lobby. I stood in the hallway for a long moment, breathing harder than I should have been from a simple elevator ride, trying to decide if I'd really seen that number or if my brain had invented it, because I'd been thinking about Maya's incident all week. I went into my apartment, but I didn't sleep. I sat on my couch with my laptop and started researching. The Horeng building history, when it was built, who designed it, any incidents or accidents during construction, any previous reports of elevator malfunctions. I found very little. The building went up in 1997, completed in early 1998. Standard mid-rise residential construction. The architecture firm was a local outfit that had designed several similar buildings in Jersey City during that development boom. No scandals, no construction deaths, no lawsuits. The elevator system was installed by a company called Precision Elevators, Inc., which was acquired by a larger corporation in 2003 and no longer exists as an independent entity. The maintenance contract had changed hands 3 times over the years. But I did find one interesting detail. In the original building plans filed with Jersey City, which are public record and available online through the city's planning department website, the Horeng building was supposed to have 13 floors. The initial design showed 13 residential floors plus a ground floor lobby, but somewhere between the planning stage and actual construction, the design changed. The final building only had 12 residential floors. No explanation in the public records. No notation about why the change was made. Just a revised blueprint dated March 1997 showing 12 floors instead of 13. Which meant, theoretically, that the elevator system might have been originally programmed for 13 floors. And if the system was never fully reprogrammed, if some ghost of that original configuration remained buried in the control board's memory, then maybe, under certain circumstances, the elevator could try to stop on a floor that no longer existed, or a floor that was never built, or a floor that existed in some other way, some space between the architectural plans and physical reality, where construction plans go when they're abandoned, where possibilities that never manifested still have some kind of residual existence. I'm not saying that's what happened. I'm not saying I believe in architectural ghosts or phantom floors or elevator systems that bridge the gap between what is and what could have been. I'm saying it's the only explanation I could find that made any logical sense, and it scared me more than any supernatural explanation would have. Because if the 13th floor existed in some in-between state, neither fully real nor fully unreal, then the rules about what could and couldn't happen stopped applying. The boundaries got fuzzy, and once you accept that boundaries can be fuzzy, that reality might not be as solid as you'd always assumed, then you start questioning everything else. I closed my laptop around 3 a.m. and tried to sleep. I couldn't. I kept thinking about Maya sitting in her apartment for 6 days, writing that same sentence over and over. It wasn't empty. I kept thinking about the hallway she described, the wrong apartment numbers, the wet carpet, the open door. I kept thinking about what it meant that something was there, something aware of her, something that had noticed her presence and might still be noticing, might still be waiting for her to come back, might have moved on to noticing other people in the building now that it had been disturbed, now that someone had seen it and acknowledged its existence. You know that feeling when your house sounds different at night, when the ambient noise changes, when something about the atmosphere shifts just slightly and suddenly you're aware of every creak and settling sound and distant siren. That's what the Horeng building felt like after October 31st. It felt different, wrong, like the building itself was holding its breath, waiting for something. Other residents started noticing more problems with the elevators in early November. The hesitations became more frequent and more prolonged. The left elevator got stuck twice in 1 week, both times requiring the repair company to come out and manually reset the system. Someone on the 6th floor reported that the elevator had opened its doors between floors, just a few inches, enough to see the concrete wall of the shaft sliding past before the doors closed again, and the car continued upward. Ron put up another notice about scheduled maintenance. The repair technicians came out on November 8th. They spent 2 days working on both elevators. When they left, Ron put up a notice saying everything had been fixed, the control boards had been replaced, the system was fully operational. Continue 23, 36, the problem stopped for exactly 4 days. On November 12th, a resident from the 10th floor, a man in his 30s named David Chen, called Ron in the middle of the night. David had taken the elevator down to the lobby at 2 a.m. to get something from his car. When he got back in the elevator to return to 10, the display showed 13. The doors didn't open. The elevator just sat there in the lobby with the display reading 13 for 30 seconds before resetting to 1 and allowing him to press his floor button. David was shaken enough to call Ron despite the hour, wanted to report it immediately, wanted it documented. Ron noted it in his incident log. The next morning, he called the elevator company again. They said they'd send someone out the following week. On November 14th, a woman from the 5th floor reported hearing that scraping sound in the middle of the night. She couldn't tell where it was coming from, maybe above her, maybe in the walls, maybe in the elevator shaft. She mentioned it to Ron in passing. He wrote it down. On November 16th, the right elevator displayed 13 while a resident from the 8th floor was inside. The doors opened. The resident, an older woman named Mrs. Alvarez who'd lived in the building since it opened, looked out into what she later described as a hallway that wasn't right. She didn't step out. She pressed the door close button repeatedly until the doors shut and the elevator took her to her floor. She went straight to Ron's office the next morning and demanded to know what was going on. Ron said he didn't know. He called the elevator company again. They scheduled an emergency inspection for November 18th. The pattern was accelerating. What had happened once to Maya in October was now happening multiple times in November. The 13th floor was appearing more frequently, becoming less of an anomaly and more of a regular occurrence. And each time it appeared, the person who saw it reported the same details. The hallway looked mostly normal but wrong in small ways. The lighting was dim. The carpet was wet. There was an open door somewhere down the corridor. And there was a sound, that breathing, that scraping, that sense of something present and aware and getting closer. On November 17th, the night before the scheduled emergency inspection, I experienced it for the second time. I'd been working late, got home around 10 p.m. The lobby was empty. I called the elevator. The left one arrived. I got in and pressed 9. The doors closed. The elevator began to ascend. And this time there was no hesitation. The display counted up smoothly, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and then instead of 9, it showed 13. The elevator stopped. My heart rate tripled. The doors began to open. I want to be clear about what I did next, because I've spent every day since then questioning whether it was the right decision. I didn't step out. I didn't even look directly at the hallway. I kept my eyes on the floor of the elevator and pressed the door close button over and over, jamming my thumb against it hard enough that it hurt, willing the doors to shut before I could see anything, before I could hear anything, before whatever was out there could notice me the way it had noticed Maya. And maybe that worked, or maybe I just got lucky, but after about 15 seconds the doors closed. The display changed from 13 to 9. The elevator rose that final bit and the doors opened onto my actual floor, and I practically ran out into the hallway and didn't look back. I went into my apartment and locked the door and immediately pulled out my phone and called Maya. I still had her number from before, from a residence text chain someone had set up for building announcements. She answered on the 4th ring, sounding surprised to hear from me. I asked if she was okay. She said she was still in Philadelphia, staying with her sister, not planning to come back to Jersey City. I asked if she'd heard about the other incidents. She had. Vanessa had been in contact with Ron about terminating the lease, and Ron had mentioned that several other residents had reported elevator problems similar to what Maya experienced. Maya's voice got quiet when we talked about it. She asked if I'd seen the 13th floor. I told her yes tonight, just 30 minutes earlier, and I'd kept my eyes down and closed the doors before seeing much of anything. There was a long pause on the line. Then Maya said something that I still think about every day. She said, "I think it's getting stronger. Or maybe it's been there the whole time and now it's awake. Either way, every time someone sees it, every time those doors open, it becomes more real, more solid. And the more real it becomes, the less choice you'll have about looking. Eventually, it won't matter if you keep your eyes down. Eventually, it'll make you look. I asked her how she knew that. She said she didn't know, not for certain, but she'd spent 6 days thinking about nothing else and certain patterns had become clear. The building was supposed to have 13 floors. Somewhere in the planning process that changed, but the 13th floor still existed in potential, in the blueprint stage, in the elevator programming, in the collective expectation of what the building could have been. And that potential had somehow manifested as an actual space, a liminal zone accessible through the elevator system, a place that was neither fully here nor fully elsewhere. Every time someone saw it, they reinforced its existence, gave it more substance, made it more permanent. I asked what she thought was in that hallway, what was making those sounds. Maya went quiet for a long time. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. She said, "I think it's us, or versions of us. People who got stuck there somehow, people who stepped out when the doors opened and couldn't find their way back. Residents from the building who disappeared over the years, or construction workers who died during building and never made it to wherever they were supposed to go. I don't know. But whatever's there, it knows the building. It knows the layout. It knows how to find the elevator. And it wants more people there. It wants company." That conversation lasted maybe 20 minutes. When we hung up, I sat in my dark apartment and stared at the wall and tried to process what Maya had suggested. It sounded insane. It violated every principle of physics and architecture and common sense. But it also explained more than any mechanical malfunction theory could. It explained the pattern. It explained the acceleration. It explained why the elevator seemed to want to stop on 13, why it was happening more frequently, why the doors were opening wider and staying open longer each time. The emergency inspection happened on November 18th as scheduled. 3 technicians this time instead of 2. They spent the entire day working on both elevators. They replaced more components. They reprogrammed the control boards again. They ran diagnostic tests. They found nothing wrong. The elevators operated exactly as they were supposed to. The display showed floors 1 through 12. The doors opened and closed properly. The safety systems functioned. Everything was fine. Ron posted a notice that evening saying the elevators had been thoroughly inspected and all systems were operational. He thanked residents for their patience. That night at 11:52 p.m., the 13th floor appeared again. This time to David Chen, the same resident who'd reported it on November 12th. And this time, the doors opened wider, wide enough that David could see most of the hallway, wide enough that he could see the open door down the corridor and the wet carpet and something moving in the darkness of that open apartment. He described it later as a figure, human-shaped but wrong somehow, standing just inside the doorway facing the elevator, standing completely still, watching. David hit the emergency alarm button. The alarm blared inside the elevator car. The door stayed open. The figure didn't move. David kept hitting the alarm, hitting the door close button, hitting every button on the panel, and finally, after what he estimated was 2 full minutes, the doors closed. The elevator took him to 10. He got out and took the stairs down to the lobby and called 911. The police arrived at 12:15 a.m. 2 officers. They took David's statement. They inspected the elevator. They rode it up and down several times. Nothing unusual happened. They asked if David had been drinking. He hadn't. They asked if he had any history of mental illness. He said no. They wrote up a report and left. Ron was called in. He reviewed the security footage. The elevator camera showed David standing in the car, pressing buttons, hitting the alarm, but the display only showed the number 1 for the lobby. No 13. No open doors. Just David apparently having a panic attack in a stationary elevator. Except David wasn't lying. I knew he wasn't lying because I'd seen it too, because Maya had seen it, because Mrs. Alvarez had seen it, because at least 6 other residents had reported similar experiences in the past 3 weeks, but none of it showed up on the security cameras. The footage only captured our reactions, not what we were reacting to, which meant either we were all experiencing simultaneous delusions or the 13th floor existed in a way that cameras couldn't record. Both options were terrifying. David moved out on November 20th, broke his lease, paid the penalty, left without finishing his notice period. He told Ron he wasn't staying in a building where the elevators opened onto places that shouldn't exist. 2 other residents gave notice that same week. Ron tried to downplay the situation, sent out an email to all tenants saying that some residents had reported unsettling experiences with the elevator, but that all mechanical systems had been thoroughly inspected and certified safe. He said anyone experiencing ongoing concerns should contact him directly. He didn't mention the 13th floor. He didn't mention the figure David had seen. He just framed it as anxiety and mechanical glitches, and encouraged people to use the stairs if they felt uncomfortable. But people were talking. In the hallways, in the lobby, in that residence text chain, stories were spreading, details accumulating. And the more people talked about it, the more real it became, the more power it seemed to have. By late November, at least half the building's residents were using the stairs exclusively, avoiding the elevators entirely, willing to climb up to the 10th or 11th floor rather than risk what might happen during the ride. I tried to stay rational. I continued using the elevator during daylight hours, figuring that whatever was happening seemed to occur mostly late at night. I took the stairs anytime I came home after 9 p.m. I started keeping a log of when the incidents were reported, looking for patterns. Most happened between 10 p.m. and 3 a.m. Most happened when someone was alone in the elevator. Most happened in the right elevator, though the left wasn't immune. And all of them involved the display showing 13, even if that didn't show up on the security cameras. On November 28th, the building management company sent a representative to meet with Ron and address the situation. I don't know what was said in that meeting, but afterward Ron looked exhausted and frustrated. He told me, when I asked, that corporate was treating it as a PR problem rather than an actual problem. They wanted him to manage tenant relations, keep people from breaking leases, maybe offer a rent discount for December to stop the exodus. They weren't taking the elevator incidents seriously, because the inspection reports showed everything was mechanically sound. December started cold. First real snow of the season on December 3rd, just a few inches but enough to make everything feel quieter, more isolated. The Horeng building lost 3 more tenants in the first week of December, all of them from upper floors. All of them citing the elevator situation as their reason for leaving, even though none of them would admit to seeing the 13th floor themselves. They'd heard enough stories. That was sufficient. Ron looked older every time I saw him. The stress was visible. He'd been building manager for 7 years without any major problems, and now his building was developing a reputation. People in the neighborhood were talking. The story had spread beyond the residents. I heard someone at the bodega mention it, referring to the Horeng building as that place with the ghost elevator. Once a reputation like that settles in, it's almost impossible to remove. On December 9th, something changed. A new resident moved into 7F Maya's old apartment. Her lease had been terminated back in November, and the unit had been cleaned and repainted and put back on the market. The new tenant was a woman in her mid-20s named Jessica Park. She just relocated from Chicago for a job in Manhattan. She didn't know about the elevator situation. Ron certainly didn't mention it during her lease signing. She moved in with help from some friends, carrying boxes up 7 floors because the movers refused to use the elevator once they heard the stories from other residents. Jessica seemed nice. I ran into her in the lobby on December 11th. She was checking her mail, looking tired but optimistic, the way people do when they're starting over in a new city. We introduced ourselves. I mentioned I lived upstairs in 9C. She said she'd heard this was a quiet building, good for young professionals. I didn't correct her. What was I supposed to say? That the building had an extra floor that only appeared sometimes on the elevator display, and that her apartment had previously been occupied by someone who'd seen that floor and couldn't psychologically recover. That would sound insane. So I just welcomed her to the building and said if she needed anything to let me know. That night, December 11th, Jessica took the elevator for the first time. She'd been using the stairs since moving in, but she'd picked up some heavy groceries after work and didn't want to carry them up 7 floors. She got in the right elevator at 11:34 p.m., pressed 7. The doors closed. The elevator began to ascend, and at 11:51 p.m. the display showed 13. The doors opened. Jessica, carrying 2 bags of groceries, looked out at the hallway. Later, when I talked to her about it, she said it took her a few seconds to realize something was wrong. The hallway looked almost exactly like the 7th floor hallway. Same beige walls, same carpet, same lighting, but the apartment numbers were different. And the carpet was wet, not just damp but soaking, water seeping out from under one of the doors. And there was a smell, something chemical and wrong, like chlorine mixed with something rotting. And somewhere down the hallway, she heard that breathing. Heavy, labored, wet. Jessica stood in the elevator holding her groceries, trying to make sense of what she was seeing. She was new to the building. She didn't know about Maya or David or the other incidents. She had no context for this, so she did what any rational person would do when an elevator stops on the wrong floor. She stepped out. She actually stepped out of the elevator onto the 13th floor, walked into that wrong hallway. And the moment her foot touched the wet carpet, the elevator doors closed behind her. I found out about this the next morning because Jessica knocked on my door at 7 a.m., still wearing the same clothes from the night before, still carrying her grocery bags with the food now spoiled, her face pale and her eyes red from crying. She asked if she could come in. I let her in. She sat on my couch and started talking, words tumbling out in a rush, and I listened as she described what happened. After the elevator doors closed, leaving her alone in that hallway on the 13th floor, Jessica tried to call the elevator back. She pressed the call button on the wall. Nothing happened. She pressed it again. Still nothing. She looked around for a stairwell exit sign, thinking she could walk down to the 7th floor. There were no exit signs. The hallway stretched in both directions, longer than it should have been, lined with doors that had wrong numbers. 13A, 13B, 13C, continuing past where the building's actual corridor would end. Jessica chose a direction and started walking. She needed to find the stairs. She needed to get back to a floor she recognized. But the hallway seemed to extend further than should have been possible, and the wet carpet made squelching sounds under her shoes, and that breathing was still there, still audible, echoing from somewhere ahead or behind her. She couldn't tell. And then she passed the open door. It was apartment 13D. The door stood open about a foot, and the interior was completely dark, no lights, no shapes visible. But the breathing was coming from inside. Definitely inside. Jessica stopped walking. She knew she shouldn't look directly into that dark doorway. Every instinct screamed at her to keep moving, find the stairs, get out. But something about the darkness was wrong. It was too dark. Not just absence of light, but a presence, a weight, like the darkness itself was substantial. And while she stood there, frozen, trying to decide whether to run past the open door or turn back, she saw movement. Something pale shifted in the darkness. Something at approximately eye level hovering in the doorway watching her. Not eyes, she was clear about that. Not eyes, but something else, something that served the same purpose, something aware and attentive. And while she stared at it, unable to move, unable to breathe, she heard a voice. Not from the apartment, from behind her. A whisper close to her ear. You shouldn't be here. Jessica ran. She didn't look back. She ran down that endless hallway away from the open door, away from whatever was watching her, away from that whisper, and she ran until she found what she was looking for, an elevator, not the same elevator. This one was at the far end of the hallway, doors standing open, interior dark except for a single flickering light. She got inside and pressed every button on the panel, all 12 floor buttons, the lobby button, the door close button, everything. The elevator doors closed. The display showed a rapid countdown: 13, 12, 11, 10, 9, 8, 7. The doors opened on 7. Jessica stumbled out into a normal hallway with normal carpet and normal lighting, and her apartment door visible just a few feet away. She went inside and locked the door and sat on her floor with her back against the wall for the rest of the night, too scared to move, too scared to sleep, too scared to process what had happened. When morning came and daylight filtered through the windows, she grabbed her phone and searched online for Horeng building elevator and found mentions of the incidents, found speculation and theories and confirmation that she wasn't the first person this had happened to. Then she came upstairs to find me because she needed to talk to someone who would believe her, someone who lived in the building and might understand. I believed her, of course I believed her, because her story matched everyone else's, matched what I'd seen, matched what Maya had described. The wet carpet, the wrong apartment numbers, the open door, the breathing, the sense of something present and aware. Jessica had experienced the full version of what the rest of us had only glimpsed because she'd made the mistake of stepping out of the elevator. She'd walked into that space. She'd given it permission by crossing the threshold. I asked if she was okay. She said no. She said she could still smell that chemical rot smell. She said she could still hear that breathing if the apartment got too quiet. She said she was breaking her lease and moving out as soon as she could pack her things today if possible, and she didn't care about the penalty because nothing was worth staying in this building another night. I helped her pack. We worked all morning filling boxes, breaking down furniture, loading everything into her car. She called her friends from Chicago, explained there was an emergency, convinced 2 of them to drive out and help her move everything today. By 6 p.m., apartment 7F was empty again. Jessica left her keys with Ron, paid the lease termination fee, and drove back to Chicago that same night. She lasted less than a week in the Horeng building. And unlike Maya, who'd stayed 6 days before leaving, Jessica escaped after one night on the 13th floor. But I don't think she really escaped, because when we were packing her apartment, moving boxes and bags to her car, I noticed something. Every time we used the elevator, every single time, Jessica would stand in the far corner with her eyes closed and her hands pressed flat against the wall, breathing in controlled counts like she was trying not to have a panic attack. And when the display counted up past 4, past 7, past 9, I would watch her face and see the tension spike, see her lips moving in what might have been a prayer or a mantra or just repeated words telling herself it would be okay, that the elevator would stop where it was supposed to, that the doors wouldn't open onto that wrong hallway again. On our 5th trip down to the car, the elevator hesitated on 4, just that familiar pause lasting maybe 2 seconds, but in those 2 seconds I saw Jessica's face go completely white. Her eyes snapped open and locked onto the display. Her breath stopped. And in that moment I understood that she would never feel safe in an elevator again, would never trust that the numbers would count correctly, would never stop waiting for the display to show 13. The 13th floor had marked her. Even if she never saw it again, even if she moved to a different city and a different building, and lived on the ground floor for the rest of her life, she would always be watching elevator displays, always be listening for that breathing, always be ready for reality to slip and reveal that impossible hallway where something patient and hungry was waiting. That's what the 13th floor does. It doesn't just exist. It infects. It spreads through memory and fear and the terrible knowledge that the world contains spaces it shouldn't, that sometimes doors open onto places that don't follow the rules. And once you've seen that, once you've stood in that wrong hallway and felt the attention of whatever lives there, you can never fully come back. Part of you stays there forever. Part of you is always standing in that elevator, watching the display, waiting for it to show the wrong number. After Jessica left, I started documenting everything. I reached out to every resident who reported an incident, asked them to describe their experience in detail, compiled timelines and commonalities. I contacted Maya and got her full account. I pulled every piece of information I could find about the building's history, the original plans, the construction timeline. I became obsessive about it, spending every evening researching, taking notes, trying to find an explanation that made sense. What I found was a pattern, but not the kind I expected. The Horeng building wasn't the only mid-rise residential building in Jersey City with elevator problems. Between 1997 and 1999, during that development boom, 7 similar buildings went up in the area. All of them were designed by the same architecture firm. All of them used the same elevator company, and all of them in their original planning documents were designed with 13 floors. But all of them in their final construction were built with only 12 floors, 7 buildings, same design pattern, same last-minute change, no explanation in any of the public records. I started reaching out to residents in those other buildings, asked if they'd ever experienced anything unusual with the elevators. Most people ignored me. I sounded like a crazy person, but 3 people responded, one from a building on Grove Street, one from a building on Columbus Drive, one from a building on Pacific Avenue. All 3 reported similar experiences. Elevators hesitating on the 4th floor, displays occasionally showing 13. One person said they'd seen the doors open onto a hallway that didn't match their building's layout. Another said they'd heard breathing in the elevator shaft late at night. A third said their building had lost several residents over the years due to elevator incidents that management wouldn't discuss. 7 buildings, all with a missing 13th floor, all with elevators that sometimes tried to reach a floor that didn't exist, all potentially harboring the same kind of liminal space, the same architectural wound where what should have been built still existed in some form, some impossible geometry accessible only through the elevator system. I don't blame anyone for doubting this. I wouldn't have believed it either if I hadn't seen it myself, if I hadn't watched the display show 13, if I hadn't stood at the threshold of that wrong hallway and felt the weight of something's attention. But once you accept that one impossible thing is real, you have to accept that other impossible things might be real too. You have to accept that buildings can have spaces that don't appear on blueprints. That elevators can bridge gaps between what is and what should have been. That something can exist in those gaps, something aware and patient and hungry for company. The Horeng building lost 12 residents between October and December 2022. 12 people moved out suddenly, breaking leases, abandoning security deposits, willing to accept financial penalties just to escape. The building management company tried to fill the vacant units but couldn't. Word had spread. The Horeng building had a reputation now. The building with the ghost elevator. The building with the 13th floor. Potential renters would tour units and ask about the elevators, and Ron would try to downplay it, say there had been some mechanical issues that were now resolved, but they could see the truth in his eyes. They could hear it in his voice. Something was wrong with the building, something more than machinery, and nobody wanted to risk it. By Christmas 2022, the building was operating at 70% capacity. Ron looked like he'd aged 10 years in 2 months. The management company was threatening to terminate his contract, blaming him for the tenant exodus even though none of it was his fault. He'd done everything right, called the repair companies, filed the incident reports, tried to maintain normalcy. But you can't maintain normalcy when reality itself is malfunctioning, when the elevator system is accessing floors that shouldn't exist. I stayed through December, partly because breaking my lease would have been expensive, partly because I'm stubborn and didn't want to admit defeat, partly because I felt like I owed it to Maya and Jessica and everyone else who'd seen the 13th floor to understand what was happening, to document it, to make sure the story was told. Someone had to witness. Someone had to remember. I used the stairs exclusively after mid-December. All 9 floors every time, carrying groceries and laundry and everything else up those concrete steps because the alternative was too risky. The building felt different by then, emptier, quieter. The vacant apartments created dead zones where no sound came through the walls. You'd walk down the hallway and half the doors would have no light coming from under them, no TV noise, no cooking smells, just absence. The building was dying. Slowly. The 13th floor was killing it. On December 27th, Ron put in his notice. He'd found another job, another building, something that didn't involve elevators that defied physics. His last day was scheduled for January 15th. He told me this in the lobby one evening, looking relieved and guilty at the same time, like he was abandoning a sinking ship but couldn't make himself feel bad about it. I didn't blame him. Nobody could blame him. He'd done more than most building managers would have done, had listened to residents' concerns and filed reports, and called repair companies even when it made him look incompetent. But eventually, you have to save yourself. Eventually, you have to walk away from situations that have no solution. I made it through December without using the elevator once. 31 days of stairs. My legs got stronger. My groceries got lighter because I bought less at a time. I learned every creak and echo in the stairwell, learned which steps were loose, learned the acoustics well enough to hear when someone else was using the stairs several floors away. The stairwell became my safe route, my guaranteed path between floors that didn't involve displays or buttons, or the possibility of doors opening onto wrong hallways. But even in the stairwell, I heard things. Late at night, when the building was quiet and I was trying to sleep, I would hear sounds in the walls, that scraping, that wet breathing. Sometimes it sounded like it was in the elevator shaft. Sometimes it sounded like it was moving through the ventilation system. Sometimes it sounded like it was inside the walls themselves, traveling through the building's infrastructure, exploring, searching, learning the paths between floors. On January 3rd, 2023, I got a call from Maya. She was still in Philadelphia, still living with her sister, still not sleeping well. She said she'd been thinking about the building, about what we discussed back in November, about her theory that the 13th floor was becoming more real every time someone saw it. She said she'd realized something else. She said the building wasn't going to let this go. The pattern was too strong now. Too many people had seen it. Too much attention had been paid. The 13th floor had achieved a kind of critical mass of belief and experience and fear, and now it would keep manifesting, keep pulling people in, keep trying to populate itself with residents who'd made the mistake of stepping across that threshold. I asked what she thought would happen to the building. She said eventually it would empty completely. Everyone would leave except the people who'd gotten trapped on the 13th floor, who'd walked into that wrong hallway and couldn't find their way back. And those people, or whatever they'd become, would exist in that liminal space forever, part of the building's hidden architecture, present but not visible, aware but not able to communicate, stuck in the floor that should have been built but wasn't. I asked if she thought there was a way to fix it, to close the 13th floor somehow. She laughed, but it wasn't a happy sound. She said you can't close something that exists because people believe it exists. The 13th floor wasn't physical, wasn't bound by normal rules. It was a thought made real, a shared nightmare given form through architectural possibility and elevator programming and human fear. The only way to make it stop would be to demolish the building entirely, erase the structure, break the connection between the physical space and the impossible space that was grafting itself onto it. But demolishing a residential building isn't easy. There are residents, leases, property rights, legal complications. And even if the Horeng building could be demolished, what about the other 6 buildings with missing 13th floors? What about future buildings that might be designed with 13 floors then built with 12? The pattern could repeat. The wound could open somewhere else. This wasn't a problem with a single building. This was a problem with architecture itself, with the gap between intention and execution, with the space between what's planned and what's built. I listened to Maya talk for almost an hour. When we finally hung up, I sat in my apartment and looked around at the boxes I'd started packing. I'd already given my notice to Ron. My last day in the Horeng building was scheduled for January 31st. 1 month. I just had to survive 1 more month, then I could leave, find a new apartment in a building that had the correct number of floors, pretend this whole experience was a weird anomaly that wouldn't follow me. But that's not how it works. I know that now. The 13th floor doesn't stay in the Harmon building. It stays with you. Once you've seen it, once you've acknowledged its existence, you carry it with you. Every elevator becomes a potential gateway. Every display becomes something to watch nervously. Every unexpected pause between floors becomes a moment of pure dread, where you're waiting to see if this is the time. If this is the elevator that will show you that number again, that will open its doors onto that impossible hallway where something patient and aware is waiting for you to step out, waiting to add you to its collection of residents who couldn't find their way back. I moved out on January 28th, 3 days before my lease ended. Couldn't wait any longer. Hired movers who used the stairs, carried everything down 9 floors without complaint because I paid them extra and didn't explain why. I left the keys in the apartment and walked out of the Harmon building for the last time on a cold Tuesday afternoon. Didn't say goodbye to Ron. Didn't look back at the building. Just got in my car and drove to my new apartment in Hoboken, a 4th-floor walk-up in a building with no elevator at all. I still live in that walk-up. I've been there almost 2 years now. No elevator, no display to show the wrong number, no possibility of doors opening onto floors that shouldn't exist, but I still hear that breathing sometimes, late at night when the city is quiet. I still hear that scraping sound in my walls, and sometimes. When I'm walking up the stairs to my apartment, I count the floors out of habit, and I always count correctly 1 through 4. But there's this moment, this split second between 3 and 4, where I feel like there should be another step, another floor, another door I could open if I just knew where to look. Harmon building still stands on Bright Street in Jersey City. I checked. The building management company is still trying to rent units, still advertising online, still showing apartments to potential tenants who don't know the stories or don't believe them. Ron was replaced by a new building manager who doesn't have history with the incidents, who can honestly say the elevators have been inspected and certified safe, who can show people the security footage that doesn't capture anything unusual. The building operates, life continues, the elevators run. And sometimes, late at night, those elevators stop on 13. The doors open onto a hallway that shouldn't exist, a hallway with wet carpet and wrong apartment numbers and an open door somewhere down the corridor. And sometimes people step out. Not often, but sometimes. And those people don't come back. I don't know where they go. I don't know what happens to them in that impossible space. But I know they're there. I know they're residents of the 13th floor now, permanent tenants in the building's hidden architecture, living in the gap between what was planned and what was built. And I know that every time someone new sees the 13th floor, every time those doors open and someone looks out at that wrong hallway, the space gets a little more real, a little more permanent, a little more hungry. If you're still here listening at this hour, you already understand why people don't talk about nights like this, why some stories stay buried, why residents move out suddenly and won't explain why. Because once you acknowledge certain truths, once you admit that reality has cracks where impossible things can leak through, you can't go back to comfortable ignorance. You have to live with the knowledge. You have to watch elevator displays. You have to count floors. You have to wonder, every single time you press a button and watch numbers illuminate and feel the car begin to move, whether this will be the ride that shows you something that shouldn't exist. The last thing I'll tell you is this. 3 weeks ago, I got a message from an unknown number, just 2 words, "It's spreading." I didn't recognize the number. I tried calling back. No answer, but I think I know who sent it. I think I know what it means. The 13th floor isn't contained to the Harmon building anymore. It's appearing in other buildings, other elevators, other cities. The pattern is replicating. What started in Jersey City during that 1997 development boom is expanding, finding new hosts, new structures with the right combination of architectural intention and execution failure. And there's nothing anyone can do to stop it, because you can't stop a thought made real. You can't demolish an idea. You can't destroy something that exists because people believe it exists. The 13th floor is permanent now. It's part of the infrastructure. hidden between the numbers, accessible through elevators, waiting in the gap between what should be and what is. And every building with a missing floor, every structure that was planned with 13 floors but built with 12, is a potential gateway. A door that might open onto that impossible hallway. A threshold you might cross if you're not careful, if you don't keep your eyes down, if you step out when you should stay inside. I hope you never see it. I hope your elevators always stop on the correct floors, always show the right numbers, always open onto hallways that make sense. But if you do see it, if the display ever shows 13 when it shouldn't, if the doors ever open onto a hallway with wet carpet and wrong apartment numbers and an open door down the corridor, remember this. Stay in the elevator. Keep your eyes down. Press the door close button and pray it works quickly. Don't step out. Don't cross the continue 23-43 threshold. Don't give it permission to claim you. Because once you're on the 13th floor, once you're standing in that wrong hallway with that breathing echoing around you and that scraping sound getting closer, you might not find your way back. You might become another resident of that impossible space, another voice in the walls, another presence waiting in the darkness for the next person who makes the mistake of stepping out when the doors open. Some buildings have secrets. Some structures contain more than their blueprints show. And some floors exist not because they were built, but because they were supposed to be built, and that intention was strong enough to create a space where possibility became reality, and what could have been found a way to manifest anyway. The 13th floor is real. It's waiting, and it's always watching for new residents. I'm Gen Z, and you were listening to SKM Horror Story. We'll meet again on another night. Until then, don't turn the lights off. Claude is AI and can make mistakes. Please double-check responses.